Hello and welcome to another episode of Taylor Talks Comics. Today we're going to talk about the Metabarons, the second cycle. Stay tuned. Alright, so this is the Metabarons, the second cycle. If you haven't watched my previous video on the first cycle, pause this video, go watch that. So probably be referencing that book a lot in this video. I'm going to try not to go over any spoilers or what have you. But I do want to go over this because the Metabarons second cycle has now been complete. It's finally finished in English with this release. They just came out about a month or two ago. It's the second cycle finale. So now we have let's try to reverse that. The second cycle came out in this thick book right here a few years ago, and then they released this accompanying hardcover. You can get both of these in a paperback, which I think is the same trim size, but to date there's not an all-encompassing hardcover yet. I'm hoping one day they will. That would be cool. And there's the backs of them. So first we're going to start on the second cycle, the first book. I do have a video on my channel too showing off all of my Alejandro Jodorowsky books. So check that out if you want to. You can see all the spines and the cool stuff of all those books and go over all of them. And I think I've added a Alejandro Jodorowsky book to my collection since then. Probably do a video on that as well. But I think he's one of the all-time great comic book writers and underrated as well, especially to the American audience. But we started off with the Metabarons. This one is all done by Alejandro Jodorowsky and Juan Jimenez. The Juan Jimenez artwork in here is brilliant. It could never be topped. However, the artwork in these books is great as well. It's just not... It's hard to get to Juan Jimenez's level. But they do a great job inching as close as possible as they can get to it. Another difference in here is that this is not scripted by Alejandro Jodorowsky. It's only... it's scripted by Jerry Frissen. Valentin Seischer and Nico Henrichan are the artists. But it's right here you see story and then writer Jerry Frissen. I would like to know how that worked. If Jerry Frissen or anybody who's watching this can let me know. I'd like to know because Alejandro Jodorowsky has told stories about when he was writing the Incal with Mobius, he'd be like sitting in a chair. It almost makes me feel like a therapist, like Jodorowsky was his patient, just laying back into a chair, explaining the story, envisioning it above his head, and Mobius is just at his drawing table, drawing it as he goes. So knowing that story, I'd like to know how this team worked. Did Jodorowsky just tell Jerry Frissen a very kind of short, succinct style of the story? Or did he give him some scripts and concept art? How'd that work? And then in the same Jodoverse, we see listings of other books you can read. I talked a little bit more about that in the first Metabarons video and also the Alejandro Jodorowsky video. If you want to know how the Jodoverse works a little bit more. And I'm going to have plenty more Alejandro Jodorowsky videos. I think he's one of the more underrated comic writers, especially in America, and also maybe the most under-talked about on YouTube. So I'm trying to fix that. So I think he's one of my favorites. So lots of more Jodoverse content. And maybe when I'm done with all those videos, I'll do a very succinct reading order of the Jodoverse. Maybe that'd be pretty cool. So the first story in here is the Techno Admiral, which you can see back here. This guy with the giant robot arms, kind of looks like a beefed up Cable. If you're familiar with Cable from X-Force, the Rob Liefeld creation. And then you get the last Metabaron who we met at the end of the book of the first cycle, and also the same guy that we met in the Incal. So again, the artwork is amazing. There's nothing, it's not bad by any means. It's just Juan Jimenez is just on another level, but this artwork is still brilliant throughout this. But we start off with the Metabaron at this point, which I guess this might be a minor spoiler, so skip ahead 30 seconds if you don't want the minor spoiler from the first cycle. I'll give you a little bit of time. Or maybe I should be quickly talking because it's 30 seconds. He wants to be the last Metabaron. He doesn't want to continue the line, the family line, so he's done. He wants to be done, and he wants to be non-violent. Okay. Spoiler part's over. But he's being forced back into action by this guy, this Techno Admiral, with these giant robot arms. And he's trying to find a way to become the ultimate warrior of the war of all time and space. So his goal is to kill the Metabaron. And you see a lot more action from the Techno Priests in here as well. They play a role in the Incal in the first cycle, but they play, I feel like, a bigger role throughout this one. And the Metabaron also has, since they're invincible, they're immortal, he has his robot Tonto take some of that aspect out of him so he can feel things. So his goal now is to embrace life, and to feel pain and love and all of that that goes along with it. So he's kind of like in retirement mode a little bit, but that also makes him vulnerable to being killed easier, which is a great storytelling device, because if you have an immortal character, how else are you going to pump up the stakes to where he can be at a risk? However, there's the Anti-Baron also created for book 2 here, and that was like kind of a clone of the Metabaron, because in order to become the Metabaron, you have to kill the previous Metabaron, but you have to be like in the bloodline. You can't just have some rando kill him. So the goal here is to create a clone of him and have that clone kill the Metabaron to take over the lineage. It's all very kind of out there concepts, but I do think, though, I talked about the first cycle was a lot more esoteric and had like a lot of more analogies and metaphors for some of the things that Alejandro Jodorowsky was into, like Eastern mysticism and tarot and that kind of thing. The second cycle is much more straightforward, and I can only assume that's because Jerry Frissen is a much more straightforward storyteller. However, that was not a bad thing for me. I do love and adore Jodorowsky's like pure writing and his dialogue and everything like that. Not just his story concepts. So I was a little bit nervous going into this knowing that he didn't write it. But he does, like, Jerry Frissen does a great job telling the straightforward story, because you almost need it to, like, he almost like reins in all the Jodorowsky kind of out there concepts and reins them in to this linear story that you can follow in an easier pattern. So if you're reading that first cycle and you're like super confused and you're like, I don't know if I can wrap my head around another cycle of that, the second cycle is much more straightforward. And just like the Juan Jimenez artwork, going from the Jodorowsky written story to this, it's not bad, it's just different. Again, like, you don't have Juan Jimenez, but you do have great giant space battles still with this great artwork. In this story too, sorry, trying to get past some of that NC-17 rated stuff. You also have a little bit of dimension hopping. So you'll have the source for, it's kind of like if you watch Dune, like the spice is like the resource that everyone is, all these different religious sects and clans and everything else are kind of revolved around. You have that same kind of thing in the Metabaron story, and the world that the Metabaron is from is depleted of that resource. So their plan is to go to a different dimension to steal all of that resource and bring it back to his dimension to save the world. So Metabaron, he's unretired, he's trying to save the world now. And it does include dimension hopping, which can be confusing at times, but I think Jerry Frissen does a great job explaining it all. I was never once confused reading the story. And when he goes, you do see these characters that look kind of like the Avatar characters, which I don't know when this was made versus James Cameron's Avatar. Let me know in the comments if you know. But when he goes to that next dimension, he falls in love with another woman. So he has a woman that he falls in love with his normal dimension and his new dimension. And there's some things that happen there that are going to bleed into the next story I don't want to spoil. But also, could maybe influence the Metabaron to maybe he doesn't want to save the previous world and he wants to just stay in his other dimension and live in the new dimension that he moved to. So there's a little bit of tension there. Here's some concept art you get in the back, which is always cool. And some covers. There's a little bit of extras in this one where you didn't see them last time. I do like these color flats. These are the coloring layer by Vincent Gruyere. I almost wish it was just colored in this way. It kind of reminds me of like Alexis Zirrit. And I know it's like just one layer of it, and then they add brushes and stuff on top of that, but I kind of like the flat color. Kind of psychedelic. So that's the end of that book, and then you have to move on to the finale. And I was really nervous to read this because the epic space saga that the first cycle was continuing the epic space saga of the second cycle before this came out. It's almost like you waited years and years to read the finale of a book and you're nervous if it's going to stick the landing or not. So going into this, I was really trying to prepare myself like, it doesn't matter, even if the ending sucks, I still have the first cycle and most of the second cycle that I loved and adored. It's some of my favorite comics I've ever read. It doesn't have to end here in this terrible way. But the ending was amazing. The ending was epic. It wraps things up. It leaves a little bit open-ended in case maybe some writer in the future wants to take on and continue the story, which I think is what all great endings do. You want to wrap up most of it, satisfy the reader, but then leave a little bit open in case someone else wants to revisit it, which we have seen that now Alejandro Jodorowsky has some other creators working in the Incal verse, doing their own stories and whatnot. So maybe there will be a third cycle of Metabarons in the future. But Alejandro Jodorowsky, I think he's 94 years old now, turning 95 this year. So probably won't be written by him. God bless his soul. He's in his later years of his life, but I think if given to some, maybe even Jerry Frissen himself can take it over and continue writing it. But I should have said too. Pete Woods is the artist in this book. Pete Woods also drew the Kill Wolfhead Incal verse book that just came out. So Pete Woods, and his artwork's great too. And you get some meta bonus material from Pete Woods with some of his concept drawings and whatnot that he was coming out with. And then here you have mapping out the Incal verse with a recommended reading order from Humanoids. I would say don't get too hung up on this. I always tell people you can either start with the Incal or start with the Metabarons. Either one. And then kind of dive in that way. But if you're trying to read it all in a linear fashion, I guess. But see, it's not even like linear in storytelling. It's really interesting because like before the Incal is a prequel to the Incal. But they have you read the Incal first. Even though this was written afterwards, so it is a true prequel. But Genesis Kostaka by Metabarons is written after the fact of the first cycle, but they have you reading that first, the prequel first on that one. So that's just one way that I'm showing you that this is not the only way you can read these stories. I always tell people, like I said, Incal, Metabarons, start there, get your feet wet, and then you can kind of branch out to whichever one you want to after that. But these are the new stories that they came out with. So they have Psychoverse, the Incal, written by Mark Russell, artwork by Yannick Paquette. Dying Star was by Dan Waters and John Davis Hunt. And then Kill Wolfhead was by Brandon Thomas and Pete Woods. And then one last image there, and then the end papers. So that's it. That's Metabarons, the second cycle. Truly, truly a great ending to the space opera, the epic space opera of the Metabarons. I cannot recommend this series enough. Truly, if you're into like sci-fi, high-concept space operas, you have to read this book. It's just absolutely brilliant. You can get all three of these. They're all still in print. And they look great on the shelf together. They don't match perfectly. I guess I should have done it this way. But I'm hoping one day we get a reprint of the original oversized slipcase of the Metabarons, and then maybe an oversized slipcase of the entire second cycle would be cool. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Like I said, you can follow me on social media, any of the links down below in the description. If you shop over at organicpricebooks.com, you can do so with my promo codes to save you some money. That's also in the description. Comment down below with your favorite space opera comics your favorite Alejandro Jodorowsky comics. Whatever you want to say. I like to talk to you guys in the comments. I always reply to all of them. Give the video a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day and keep reading comics.